some comments that have come into us here. Mick Martin on YouTube says, we're only at the beginning of his amazing journey, obviously in relation to Ronan O'Gara there. Let's not forget just how significant this achievement is and what we have at our disposal for Ireland rugby. Michael on YouTube, for whatever reason, off the ball are pushing a narrative that Irish rugby is lacking and needs to bring in more players. Seems counterintuitive for an Irish sports show. I mean, do you expect that we're here to be cheerleaders? Like, we're here to sort of pick over the bones about why an Irish province has come up short in the European semi-final? Obviously, as Ronan says, and he's right to point it out, that it's absolutely fantastic achievement to get that far, but they've come up short, and by a long chalk at the end, the game did feel as if, even with 7 or 9 points in it towards the end, that they were out. So I think it's right that we would ask those questions. Yeah,
like, I mean, obviously, do you think maybe from your Leinster standpoint that you have overreacted to last weekend? Like, I mean, from a Munster view, it has certainly been an unbelievable few years from Leinster. It continues to be. The Pro 14, obviously, domination that Leinster enjoy may have a little bit of an impact at what's going on. But what may be a bigger factor in why Leinster haven't won the last couple of Champions Cups is that Saracens have an unbelievable team. La Rochelle have an unbelievable team. Being away from home is an unbelievably important factor, and that they're actually as important as any of the wider conversations around Irish rugby.
Yeah, all of that is totally fair, but also if you want to be absolutely ruthless about it, and that's the way I think the people who are running Irish rugby need to look at it, Ireland have not won enough Six Nations over the last 10 or 15 years. They've not obviously performed at a World Cup. The provinces, like I was making the point there, Leinster have won Heineken Cup in the last, whatever it is, 9 or 10 years. They've been in one other final, and that's it for Irish provinces. And is that enough? Do we think that's enough over 10 years? I don't think that's enough. I don't think that Irish rugby should sit back and be satisfied that getting to a semi-final is enough. So I think that it's right that we would question as to why that's the case. On Ronan's point there about whether, if that game was played again next weekend, who would win it, like, the difficulty that you have in the aftermath of picking through a game like that is that it did feel done, even though it was within reach from a scoreboard point of view. A little bit like looking at Arsenal last night. You just felt they're just, no matter how long this game goes on for, they're not going to get it done. Obviously, the Leinster try towards the end of the game is really nothing more than a consolation. I know Ronan O'Gara is saying that he's not happy with it, and he'll have to circle back to it again at some point down the track, that, you know, La Rochelle shouldn't be letting their standards off at that stage. But the game was done, it was cooked, and that's the thing for me. It doesn't feel like, if they played again next weekend, that Leinster are that close that they might be able to edge it. But look, who knows? And maybe it is a case that Stuart Lancaster was making the point with you yesterday, that it's a Rocky Elsom or it's a Brad Thorne, it's a Will Skelton, that's just the presence of a player like that suddenly changes things, or that the presence of a Johnny Sexton on the day maybe suddenly turns the screw in a way that Ross Byrne doesn't have the experience or maybe the ability to do. So I'm not sure, but I think that it's right that I would strongly disagree with our YouTube commenter there, that it's right that we would forensically and ruthlessly look at and question why Irish provinces aren't winning more Heineken Cups.
I wonder though, is there something going on here where whenever a defeat happens in Irish sport, we tend to judge it through the prism of the team that has inflicted said defeat? So you mentioned Will Skelton there, for example, who is the man of the hour when it comes to the latest defeat for Irish sport, if we want to label this thing last weekend. We therefore have a conversation about what players can we bring in from other countries around the world that aren't necessarily from Ireland, that can also bring a powerful aspect to the game. It's like when Ireland got beaten by Japan, it's like, how can we offload more? It's like when we got beaten by Argentina in 2015, how can we play like them? It is always through the prism of the opposition. Whereas when Munster got beaten by Leinster for the millionth time in a row in a game of significance last month, the question of Munster was, how do Munster get to the level that Leinster are at in terms of their talent development? That history is always written from the victor's standpoint. And I just wonder if actually the solution that La Rochelle have found for them to be a really good team in Europe is actually the right solution for an Irish province.
Which is what? To bring in...
Go back, well, not go back, but like go back towards say, a Rocky Elsom type player, but on a more frequent level, on a more having more of those types of players in the squad.
Yeah, look, and I think they do. Like, I think maybe Scott Vardy was to fill that role, and like, an outstanding player, but he couldn't do enough to force himself into the starting 15 last weekend. So, like, yeah, and he's obviously leaving, but I think there'll always be that balance on. I think there'll always be the balance of the homegrown players and like the world class players that we have, and like James Ryan and Johnny Sexton could still go on to tour the lines as a distinct possibility. It'll still be a blow to their ego because they haven't been sort of selected in the initial squad, and so I think we can sort of continue to have homegrown world class players in tandem with the Jim Williams and the Rocky Elsom and all those players that have come in over the years at all the Irish provinces at one point or another. There's plenty of them up at Ulster, the Ruin Pienaars of this world, and it'll always have to be that balance, and that's probably the way it should be. And I think we've always looked at it that way, that with those players coming in, that even though at times we were looking at the likes of Jim Williams that I've mentioned him at a time where Irish rugby was at not a great stage of its development, obviously coming through professionalism, and looking at players like that to lead the way. We will look at players like that now going into the future, but just for different things, to be there to to offer something, to come from a different background that you know, in terms of style. Those Southern Hemisphere players, those New Zealand players, just bring something different, some the grain of rice on that'll help tip the balance. I think we should and will always look at that.
I think there's a slight overreaction on specific angles. Is my point that that's not the sole answer. Like, I think if I just don't think that a European semi-final defeat is a terrible outcome or requires naturally
no, but conversely, on the counterpoint of the YouTube commenter is that nor should we sit back and go, sure, wasn't that great.
But that's not what anybody said. I don't think that YouTuber is actually suggesting that, and that's certainly not what I'm suggesting either. It's that to get to a European Cup semi-final and to have utter dominance in the Pro 14, you're already doing something right, and to alter something dramatically, which is often the product of ruthlessness, may actually be counterproductive.
Yeah. Look, we are probably somewhere along the lines on the same page there. You are watching, it's 3 minutes past 8, you're watching OTB AM. We're live in association with Gillette. Good morning start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Plenty more comments coming in, and do keep them coming into us as well in relation to the Lions. Dumphy on YouTube was agreeing with our previous YouTube commenter there, saying that Leinster consistently at the top 4 in Europe, Munster consistently punches in Europe. You'd swear they were the Ospreys, the way their demise is reported, and that's very much feeding into the conversation that we've just been having there on the line zone. I have to say that the omission of Johnny Sexton from the squad is a mistake. I think that it's been spoken about like as if every single player who's selected in that Lions squad has been selected with the intention that they're going to appear in every minute of every single test, which is obviously not what happens with these things. Sexton is a dog. He's an angry bastard around the pitch. He'll be angry around meetings. He'll be angry around the training ground. He'll be keeping the likes of Ronan O'Gara saying there that Eoin Farrell is probably going as a 10. He'll be keeping him honest over the course of it. He'll be keeping Dan Biggar honest, and Finn Russell, let's face it, is there, I think, to be a Wednesday player. Maybe he makes a squad bench for some of the testing, that he might offer you something slightly different, a bit of magic in the last 10 minutes if you're really desperately chasing the game where you're sort of 10 points down and you need something very different to come into it. But I think that Sam Warburton was asked in the very long preamble to the squad announcement yesterday about the difference between captaining your country and the Lions, and he said that it was easier on the Lions because the calibre of the leadership group that are around you, and that is Sexton. He'd be pushing for the 23 every single week. He'd be keeping those players honest. 10 minutes to go in a final test on against South Africa at Ellis Park, and you're asking me who I want on the pitch to drive the screw home for the Lions. Then of all of those names that I've just mentioned, it's Johnny Sexton all day, every day.
I agree with that end point, but unfortunately that's not what it comes down to when Warren Gatland is making his decision. You have to believe in what Gatland is saying yesterday, that it comes down to durability. And again, the point that the quote from Gatland that I mentioned at the top of the show, that he's looking at Sexton and how many consecutive tests he's played, and he's seen he hasn't done 3 in a row since 2018, and that's why he feels that he wouldn't be durable enough to be a 10 in this year's British and Irish Lions. His reasoning on that level is sound. Like, you have to give him that. When it comes to Sexton, the player, that's an entirely different conversation. And who would I want over the ball if it was a decisive kick at the end of a third test in the Lions? Johnny Sexton or Finn Russell? You pick Johnny Sexton. To be honest with you, you might pick Johnny Sexton over Owen Farrell and over Dan Biggar as well. You would have him ahead of almost everybody else when it comes to the British and Irish teams at the moment still to make that kick. But it's not just about that. Warren Gatland isn't picking a team for 10 minutes. He doesn't know how early Owen Farrell will go down. If, for example, Johnny Sexton is your 10 on the bench, he doesn't know how early Sexton would then have to play, and he doesn't know how much time Johnny Sexton will then have to play. Maybe your starting 10, if Sexton, as you put it, is your backup, maybe your starting 10 goes down after 10 minutes of the first test, and then all of a sudden it is 3 consecutive tests essentially that he's got to perform in, which he has not shown recently that he's able to carry out in the view of Warren Gatland. So yes, from our own green, spectacled view, it's not great that Johnny Sexton's not going to have that responsibility to actually win a Lions tour, because it will come down to your second or third choice 10. But you can see why Gatland came to the decision.
They've basically said in the press conference yesterday, Johnny Sexton is a better out half than most of the people we're bringing. He's just not as durable. I mean, I think that's a mistake. It's incredible that, in fact, that you would admit that in a press conference. Johnny Sexton is better than Dan Biggar. Everybody on the planet who's ever watched a rugby game knows that that's true. The coaching staff know that that's true. They've basically said as much in the press conference yesterday. They're just saying, we're not sure he can get through this thing. But I think in a series like that, not only Johnny Sexton, but all of these players, Owen Farrell has his own injury worries from time to time, that all of these players, like Dan Biggar's biggest selling point is he's durable. I mean, is that what you're bringing with you to win a test against a test series against South Africa?
Like it really well maybe, Adrian. Like that could be what he's looking at. Who is relatively strong and who is durable? It seems to be a combination of those two things that is as important as anything else to get you on the plane. You obviously need to be operating off a very high level. But if Warren Gatland is looking at the differences between these players and it's not overly significant, then he's going to pick the player who's most durable. Like, I can kind of see why he did it, as much as if you or I were Warren Gatland, we would have picked Johnny Sexton, no question about it. I definitely would have picked him. But there's a reason why Warren Gatland managed to get over the line in Australia 8 years ago. There's a reason why he managed to get a draw in New Zealand 4 years ago. He tends to get some decisions, the majority of the decisions and the hard ones, correct. And I think maybe we attach a Welsh bias to him naturally, and that may stick in the craw when it comes to Dan Biggar's selection. But in reality, it would have been Finn Russell versus Johnny Sexton.
I think we're all predicting that at some point on the track he releases, I think, what will be another autobiography, and he's like, yeah, I mean, I was really biased towards those Welsh players, and everyone goes, I knew it, absolutely knew it. It was so obvious. I mean, look, nobody is doubting that he's chosen a strong squad. Clearly, no matter what you do, that's going to be the case. There's some absolute bolters of calls in it, obviously, and some of them we're discussing there, and some of them are reasonable, and like they may well go on and win the series down there. Let's not rule any of that stuff out. It still won't mean you'll get people after that who'll go, and you were calling for Sexton to be in there. It still doesn't mean that it's the right call.
Well, it kind of does. I mean, if they go down and win 3-0, for example, it was the right decision. Like, it'll be very hard to make a case now, in fairness, to say that Sexton should have been there if they get the tour win.
Which, look at, okay, but at the same time, it's not to say that if Sexton's in there, they're going to. What I'm saying is, it's a stronger squad if Sexton is in there, and the outcome of the series isn't going to define that one way or the other.
It's a stronger squad if a fully fit Johnny Sexton's in there, that's for sure. And Gatland, I think, would admit that above everybody else, like that he is on quality a better player than a lot of the other players in the squad currently. But he obviously just doesn't fully believe that he will be fit for the 3 tests, which is what you're going to need. Like, you need to be thinking about a scenario where can all of these, 36, 41, I don't know the number of people, can all of these people potentially start a test? And maybe 37. He feels that when it comes to test 1 in particular, that if it comes down to it, if you've got injuries picked up in midweek games or late injuries in training, that Sexton may not be able to do the full 3 tests. Now, the thing is, Sexton may have had this Lions tour in his head for the last little while, and this is the time when he's going to have his body perfect for. We don't know what way he's looking at it. Yeah. And he also may be looking at it from the standpoint of the fact that his lack of durability, according to Warren Gatland, has been way overplayed, that it has been more overplayed than maybe lack of durability when it comes to some other players. Like Gatlin said, it's nothing to do with the head injuries, and that has been the thing that grabs all the headlines when it comes to Sexton down through the years. So if it's something to do with that, then it comes down to other aspects and the little niggles that he picks up here and there. Is Sexton privately going to be frustrated that he is the man who gets his injury problems picked out when there are other players in the squad who've obviously gone through injuries in the past? The bottom line may be that the age profile of Johnny Sexton has worked against him as well, that you combine the few niggles, as I said, that he's had, and the fact that he's getting on a little bit. But I can see where you're coming from as well, like the England performance. He was sublime in that, and you would have thought that would have been the final audition.
Well, he's very selective with the games, and he's like, well, I watched La Rochelle at the weekend and James Ryan didn't really perform there, but I watched Scotland in the Six Nations and wow, geez, they were really good. Like, look how they performed in France. I know, but they were beaten by Wales and Ireland. Like, I mean, you can be as selective as you want. Brian O'Driscoll hit the nail on the head for me. If he's looking for reasons to leave him out, he'll find them. But I mean, you could say that about every player, and I think that's it's probably true with that. He also spoke about the part of the reason of the inclusion of Aki was the partnership with Henshaw, that he's seen that and he's seen it develop. But that's nonsense, because ultimately you're probably going to have a if you go by Brian O'Driscoll's test selection yesterday, I think you might have like Murray, Bigger, Farrell, Henshaw combination. There's almost no existing partnership in that. So I think that, look, he's made the selection. He's got to come out and defend it and sort of give his rationale for it. But
well, what's your point? What's your point on the Aki thing there? Like, do you think that Aki shouldn't have been included?
No, my point is that he's bending the rules to just suit whatever the narrative is, because he's saying part of the rationale about selecting Aki was the partnership with Henshaw.
So you think Sexton and Murray would have been?
The partnership point doesn't stand up at all. It's partnerships is totally counter to the Lions to begin with. It's nothing to do with partnerships. It should never be a factor.
Yeah,
what I'm saying is he's decided that Sexton, and like Neil Jenkins was out yesterday. You mentioned about Gatlin he's not including the concussion conversation. You read Neil Jenkins' comments yesterday, which, by the way, I mean, you're more confused about them after reading them than you were before you ever began. He does include stuff about the concussion being a factor in it. So I mean, I think that it was a close call. Really went down to the wire. It's not like we don't know who Johnny Sexton is, and we weren't sure if we could take a risk on him. It's like, this guy, he performs. That's a test animal was an expression that Brian O'Driscoll used in the piece he did with us yesterday. And like, I mean, top 5 on the planet test animals. It's Johnny Sexton. I feel it's a bit of a no-brainer. Look, he could well still travel. I hope he still travels on, and I hope he it wouldn't exactly be sticking the 2 fingers up to Warren Gatlin if he goes out and ends up winning a couple of tests for him. But you'd like to see it.
And you would have to think that himself and James Ryan are quite close to being the next man up in their position. Certainly Sexton is you'd like to think his 4th choice. That being said, when Neil was on the other morning predicting his Lions, he had Sexton at 6th. So there's no guarantee whatsoever that if there's injuries, Sexton gets on that plane as well. And if Gatlin is saying it's durability, are we saying that Sexton is the 4th most durable out half in Irish and British rugby? You see, the thing is, you probably can't definitely make that case. So, there's no guarantee that if an out half goes down, that Sexton is the next man up. But on the side of James Ryan, maybe he'd be a little bit closer to being a banker if there's a second row who does go down. But second rows generally quite hardy. Like, James Ryan will just be really disappointed that this hasn't happened for him this season, because he looked like an absolute banker. The conversation around James Ryan was him being a leader in the Lions, let alone being a squad member in the Lions. So this is a career setback for James Ryan. You can't really get away from that. Yeah,
it's incredible. And a mention for Cian Healy as well that nobody's been talking about. And there was some squads that were predicted beforehand, some team picks that were made beforehand had him starting, and a Lions test cap that his career really deserved has eluded him as well, and that's I'm absolutely no doubt having got injured in 2013, I think it was that he travelled. I'm sure a disappointment as well. Lots of comments in on this, and we'll bring more of those to you before we leave the show at 10 this morning. But it is at 8:15 on this Friday morning, and we've lots still to come. If you've just joined us, good morning to you first of all. But also, you've missed Ronan O'Gara. He was on with us a little bit earlier this morning. You can get the full chat in the podcast section of the OTB Sports app right now, and you should go and download that app from wherever it is that you get your apps.